Welcome to the Chase Hudson Show, a podcast dedicated to inspiring you to become extraordinary. Each week, we sit down with top-tier business owners, real estate investors, and influencers to inspire you to build your legacy. It's time to level up. Welcome to another episode of the Chase Hudson Show. Today, we have Brian Reeder, who is the co-founder and CEO of Vessel Kitchen, a Utah-born restaurant redefining the concept of casual dining across the state. Brian has such a great story. If anyone's interested in the food space, hospitality, Brian has such a great background. And then he goes in to share how they founded Vessel. They've grown it up to 6 locations, soon to be 7. Talks about the menu and profitability, raising capital. So it's an awesome story. Excited for you guys to hear it. With that, let's jump in. All right, guys, welcome to another episode of the Chase Hudson Show. Today we have Brian Reeder, who is the co-founder and CEO of Vessel Kitchen, a Utah-born restaurant redefining the concept of casual dining across the state. Founded in 2016, Vessel pushes the envelope of culinary innovation by offering an upscale vibe and quality meals at a fast casual price and convenience. Vessel currently operates 6 locations across the state, with a 7th opening later this year in the Salt Lake City airport. So with that, Brian, welcome in.
Thank you for having me.
I'm
excited to be here.
Yeah, I am too. Yeah. I didn't mention this, but I love Vessel Kitchen.
Oh, thank you.
I eat there quite frequently.
I'm glad to hear that.
And it is. So I was in LA for 3.5 years when I was with JP Morgan, and obviously food options there are fantastic. Salt Lake City has a great food scene as well. I don't want to discount that. But when I found Vessel probably a year ago, I was like, there's nothing like this that I've had or in the state. So kudos to you guys.
Thank you. It's been an interesting journey because, to your point, I think especially here in Utah, I'd say there are a couple compatriots that we have in town, but we don't have an LA, coastal kind of level of like, okay, New York, you have Diggin, you have, Little Beat, you have Cava, you have all these like big scale kind of, very healthy or fast casual options. And then you have LA that has, gosh, in and of itself, a dozen, tender greens, sweet greens, lemonade, kind of all over the place. And yeah, I mean, my business partner and I were both living in Park City, and he had kind of already developed this back in, a handful of years prior to us starting. And when we were connected, we both just saw the need for, and him especially saw this need for something that's better in Utah, and not, downplaying any quality from anyone else, but just, I think we wanted something that was kind of representative of how we wanted to eat or how we did eat with meal prep and just that kind of stuff. And so I think it's a common comment we get is it's very kind of LA or very, New York or whatever you want to call it. And so, there's so much more presence on the coasts for that kind of stuff. So I think as we got into Salt Lake, especially as we got into Salt Lake, I think in Park City, it was kind of this natural fit. That was our first location. And the community immediately was so embracing and just very generous with, with their patronage. But as we got into Salt Lake, I think we kind of started going, okay, we're a little bit up again. Like we have to reevaluate kind of how we approach this, because it's as much kind of educating people about importance of food and importance of quality and importance of like, what you're putting into your body, as much as just like, telling people, hey, we're serving everything from mac and cheese and mashed potatoes to veggies to kind of all over the place. So I think there is that different mentality. I think some people in Salt Lake have, where quantity is still a factor as opposed to quality. And so it's finding the balance of the two. Yeah. Sure.
And I think you guys have done a great job. Definitely Utah County. There's a lot of, people are cheap, and I'm kind of included in that, right? It's like they want bang for their buck. It's finding that balance.
It's that sweet spot for sure.
Love it, man. Well, first thing I typically ask my guests, Brian, is to talk a little bit about your upbringing. So maybe what should people know about your upbringing to help us understand who you are today?
Yeah. So I grew up in small town Oregon, on kind of in the country. I went to school at Oregon State. But even prior to that, I was always kind of involved in entrepreneurial ventures. And so that started in high school, where I helped some buddies of mine and one buddy specifically that had started a wallet company. And so was helping him kind of with production and with, everything he was doing as he was trying to build this business. And so kind of, I'd say from a pretty young age, I was always exposed to it, even if I wasn't like actively pursuing it, if that makes sense. And so helped pay my way through college by doing that and by literally making duct tape wallets. And then with that worked for that company out of college, along with always having a restaurant gig in some form. And so with that, went to school for business, actually lived in Thailand on an exchange program for the better part of a year while I was in college, and then came back and graduated and worked for the wallet company full time, and just tried to, help scale a business and help kind of understand what that process looks like and take it from something that's literally handmade by us to finding manufacturing, developing new material, developing printing process, and everything that comes with operating a business of, okay, how do we market this? How do we, get it out to the masses? How do we find commercial accounts? Like all these different aspects. And so I think as far as upbringing goes, and as far as kind of younger years, I'll be the first to say, like, I'm always so envious of those that like have a plan. And they're like, oh, my grandfather knew he wanted to be an engineer when he was like 12 or some shit. Like, and to me, that was always like this weird, like, wait, how do you know that? Like, how could you possibly and so I think my journey has always been one of like, I want to work hard. I want to learn more, but I didn't necessarily have that, like, oh, I know exactly what I want to do. And so that's where I would say the wallet company really kind of introduced me to like having structure, having a little bit of discipline, but also just generally getting the bug for like, oh, wow, there's a lot kind of here that needs to be managed simultaneously and a lot of priorities that we have to deal with at once, and really hooked me in a lot of ways for that kind of pace, that lifestyle, that mentality, regardless of kind of the industry that you're talking about. And so with the wallet company, we all did everything. There were 5 of us that were in the business. We had a really cool space in Portland. And we're just trying to make it work. And it was a lot of different hats that you wear. My job was marketing one day, production the next, shipping the next, kind of all, literally, account management, like you name it, we all kind of did a little bit of everything while having a focus. One of my big ones, and this is, I want to say like 05 through 08, 07, was social media, which at the time was very different than it is today, right? Like, yeah, sure. At that point it was Dig, it was Stumble Upon, it was, Instagram didn't exist. Facebook was it was still the Facebook, I think at the time, or maybe it had just shifted. And so it wasn't really a thought of like, okay, how do you market something through Facebook, or, that was, I don't even think they didn't have a platform for it at the time. It was more of, okay, how do you promote these things? And so it was an interesting time to be part of a group that was kind of discovering SEO, discovering SEM, and establishing like methodology to create pop and to create like visitors to your website and what have you. And so I worked with a lot of actually some local guys like Masatala that were, a couple years ahead of us on it. But we were kind of discovering this industry or creating this industry as we went, of like, and a lot of those guys that were in that community have gone on to start their own agencies and kind of, live in that marketing space. But that was a lot of what I was doing at the time, was trying to understand, Google and the relationship that a Dig or a Reddit or a Stumble Upon had as they were literally being created and kind of gaining prominence. So a lot of my role back then was very centered around kind of the social media marketing and figuring out what the hell it was, to be perfectly honest. Right. And then the company actually, we ran into some troubles with funding and with, there were some in error, some bills that went to collections that shouldn't have, that were like personal and kind of related. And so that was also a interesting experience of like watching a company kind of struggle and not, be on this trajectory, and then all of a sudden kind of have funding shut off and go, holy shit, how do we pay for the PO hitting the dock? How do we survive? Did that for a while. And then, eventually moved to Arizona, chasing a girl, and the wallet company became a bit of was put on hold for the time being. But within that time, I also always had restaurant jobs. So I always worked in, managed, opened, started, whatever it was, restaurants that were anything from very fine dining to very, very casual dining. And that's where I kind of always worked, was restaurants. It was always from 14 on, I always had a job in a restaurant. And so it just, we paid ourselves almost nothing at the wallet company. And so it just always was a thing that was like, cool, I need to serve, bartend, manage, whatever it was to make ends meet. And so it was always a weird relationship I had with restaurants, because my mentality was kind of like, I always kept it at arm's length. It was never something I was like, no, this is my career. It was always, no, this is like a side job that most people have to make money through school or whatever it was, which I certainly did. But it wasn't until Arizona that I really leaned into it and said, okay, even though I've helped start restaurants, been GM, you name it, cooked, front of house, back of house, whatever the role, Arizona was really the first time I went, okay, I want to see where I can take this, like if I actually lean into it and treat it as mine, as opposed to kind of keep it at arm's length and be like, well, no, this can't be a career. It's just like a job. So I would say my young years were very much full of like, a respect for food, but not necessarily a like admiration of it. And that came a lot from upbringing as well, where like we always had a huge garden. My family, had a ton of acreage that they farm in rural Oregon. And so they're growing vegetables, they're growing berries, they're growing hops, they're growing, you name it. And so I always, I think, had that respect for food, but not necessarily that like that admiration for like what can be done with it. Right. So I would say, as far as the younger years go, some entrepreneurial background, but a lot of restaurants always kind of intermingled in, for sure.
Yeah. So, I mean, from the wallet company restaurant experience, sounds like a lot of variety, a lot of hats you had to wear, as you mentioned, and just a lot of learning and growth. And then it sounds like ultimately pivoting to focus solely on the restaurant space. So you moved to Arizona, and I noted down, a couple of these, like Cafe Cubano. So tell us what happened when you went to Arizona.
So I get to Arizona. Things with a girl didn't work out as anticipated, as usually happens in long distance. And ended up staying. I, for a month, took a job doing corporate sales with Wells Fargo. Was not for me. And had already gotten a job, of course, kind of serving and helping at a restaurant, in a hotel. And so I actually ended up working for Intercontinental, down at the Monte Lucia, which it was an Intercontinental at the time. And ended up there for quite a while, where I literally started as a server. General manager had gotten hired, I think, the same week I had, and then eventually ended up as assistant GM and then general manager. He moved on and actually opened his own restaurant that I ended up joining a little bit later, but ended up with this hotel company, where kind of rose through the ranks as someone kind of willing to put the time in and work a lot of hours, and said, I really want to understand this and learn it and kind of embrace the operation side of food and beverage and hospitality. And so it would be 80 to 100 hour work weeks pretty consistently. And, had some very good friends in Arizona, but didn't have family there and didn't, move there knowing like two people. And so holidays were at work because it's a hotel. So the hotel's full. And so you're not spending, like you don't have a traditional schedule. You don't have kind of that traditional kind of lifestyle, I guess. And so with that, a lot of my time down there was like, well, I have nothing else to do. I may as well go to work and kind of try to embrace and soak up as much knowledge as I can from, in a hotel environment, a bunch of other people that have a lot of that kind of knowledge to give. And so I worked for a couple of very good GMs down there, that were very experienced, but also kind of consummate either maitre d's or like operators, where they, there are a bunch of different styles that you can run a restaurant or run a hotel. And so I saw a good breadth of that, and really kind of use that as like boot camp of like, I want to know about it. I want to learn it. If it's PR related, if it's finance related, if it's HR related, whatever those areas were, And hotels are these little mini cities where like you kind of have to have everything. You have an engineering team, you have a HR team, you have finance, you have all these things that for a small business, you don't have that luxury, right? Like you are HR and finance and whatever. And so I think that helped a lot with structure, where I could see, okay, this team does this segment of the work, this team does this segment, and really start to understand the relationship with them and how they operated. And I went to school for finance and business, so I always kind of had that backbone, but I just had never really used it, where I wasn't really thinking of it in those terms. And so I was at Intercontinental for I think 3.5 years, something like that. In that time, the former GM that I had became a business partner, where they already had a restaurant that was going called F&B that had an amazing team. Pavle, who was one of the owners, and Charlene, who's the other. Charlene won Best Chef James Beard a couple of years back. Pavle is like one of, if not the best maitre d' I've ever encountered, where like you won't see someone for 5 years and he'll be like, "Oh, Mrs. So-and-so, do you usually, I remember you drinking this cocktail. Would you like," like where it just incredible, like kind of dynamic with customers and like knowledge of people and like build those relationships. And that was never really my thing. So it was amazing to see that. And Charlene, I think especially on the food side, we were so passionate about the food we served and worked with so many local vendors that it really started filling in that like, okay, hey, this stuff matters. And I already had grown up kind of in that environment from more of like a farming side, but I hadn't seen that like care put into like the food that was on the plate. I had in some ways, but Charlene really, I think, helped me fall in love with kind of the food that's being served and how it can impact people and the care that can be put into it and the love that it can demonstrate. So I was with F&B, and then we opened a little wine shop called Arizona Wine Merchants, and kind of shifted spaces, and then had another project that was like wine bar we had 3 spaces that were kind of in a row that were in Old Town Scottsdale, where we had F&B, we had the little wine bar, and then a little shop, and helped operate that for a while. And then, and as a 28, 29-year-old, guy that's single and kind of going, okay, what's next? That really turned into, okay, I want to do more. F&B was amazing and it taught me a ton. It was the kind of experience where it kind of made me more hungry for like, okay, I want my own thing that I own, that I operate, that I, appreciate. So I kind of put it out to them of like, hey, I love it here. And like, I do, do still have great relationships with them, but it was like, what else can I be doing? And I was kind of done with the heat. I love Arizona. I go back on a regular basis and still have great friends there, but 115 degrees on an average summer day is not, even though Salt Lake sadly it feels like lately has been at times in that bucket. But yeah, so I just got to the point where I was like, okay, I want to do more. I want to do something else. And someone had reached out about Montage up in Deer Valley. Okay. And so I got on a plane and flew up here, and it was green. It was June, and I got on the plane. It was 101 degrees at like 4:30 in the morning. And then I get here and it's like 68 and green and lush, just beautiful. And I was like, okay, I should probably, it's time to go. So Arizona was a wonderful experience. I think it helped me in a lot of ways, I think, establish kind of who I was, and became formative in like establishing some of those good habits and patterns of like being overwhelmed and having to work through how to not be overwhelmed anymore. Where it's like, hey, you're at a hotel, there's 30 different departments that have all these different areas that you have to coordinate with, and that you have to deal with room service, and you have to deal with, fine dining stuff, and like, coffee shop, and there's 7 outlets, you're managing pools, you're coordinating with rooms for this or housekeeping or whatever. And so there's just that like frenetic pace, because you're also doesn't close. Like you're open 24/7, 365. So it's like, it truly is, it's a terrible and wonderful experience working in a hotel. It's such a camaraderie, and it teaches you so much, but it's also, you're frying yourself. It's like, you want to work 100 hours a week? Because that's an easy way to do it for sure. So yeah, so I think that helped a lot to kind of help me structure my time, structure my like priorities, and help me understand kind of like how business comes together generally with kind of hotels as that microcosm.
Yeah,
if that makes
I love
sense.
it. And I think you're hitting on a pattern that I've seen with a lot of the people I've had on the show is going to work to learn in an environment where you're just getting those reps. You're going through the stresses, you're seeing it happen. And maybe it's not your business per se, but you're part of it. It's integral. And then it's that training ground to when you feel like, okay, now I'm ready. You have all that experience. And I think it just speaks to, I think a lot of like these days people can be a little impatient, right? Like I just want to come out of high school and start a thing or do my thing. And so I think it's extremely valuable. And to the stress of, I was a waiter for a short time at Ruby River Steakhouse. I don't know if you're familiar with the concept. They're in Provo, but anyway. And even for that small aspect of just like getting orders right and multiple requests at the same time and drinks and just it is crazy. So I have respect to you and grinding through that. So you decided to come to Salt Lake. So did you work at the Montage then for a time? Okay.
Yeah, I was up there for quite a while. And to your point, so a former mentor of mine that was a GM with Intercontinental and worked, he was at the tail end of my time at Mauna Lucia. Name was Chris Mander, British man, like was like their, I don't even know his title before he basically came out of retirement to help for a brief period as they were selling the property and kind of going through some updates. And he always told me like, you get two paychecks. One is money. The other is experience or knowledge or learning. And he basically was like, as soon as one stops, if the money stops, time to go. But as soon as you stop learning in that environment, you should look to move on. Like if you're not learning anymore, why are you still there? And I have always kind of maintained that mentality for sure. So moved to Park City, took a job with Montage, worked in restaurants. So I was director of restaurants kind of as I took a role with the property, overseeing the, restaurant division. There was 5 or 6 restaurants, helped open a new one in Burgers and Bourbon up there. And just tried to, I think, create some structure around kind of how the division operated, how, create consistency with quality, create consistency with training. And Montage is an amazing brand. They have, I think, tripled or quadrupled in size since I joined. When I joined, it was the 3rd property that they had, and they had opened, I think, a year, maybe less than a year prior. And it was a very important property for them. They had Laguna Beach that they opened in, I think, 2003. They had Beverly Hills that opened in like 2008, right in the middle of the financial crisis, right in the middle of the real estate crisis. And it was a bit of I get the impression it wasn't as kind of smooth as it could have been. And so Deer Valley opening in 2010 was like, they needed to kind of demonstrate that, hey, we can scale, we can kind of grow effectively. And so joining that property, and I've always kind of looked at it this way of like, anytime you switch jobs, you have that opportunity to kind of reinvent yourself or to like define again who you want to be, because you've established a reputation in one place. And, if you're the kind of hard ass that's all about, standards, if you're the, kind of more creative side, whimsical side, whatever you want to call it. And so I think going into Montage, I think I was 29 or 30, and it was really, I think, the most thoughtful I had been about like, hey, who do I want to be? How do I want to behave? How do I want to come across? And what do I want to do? Like, what do I want to be? Do I want to be the person that people come to? Do I want to be the person that's, kind of cracking the whip? Like, where do I want to land? And the nice thing about Montage is, it's a unbelievable property. It's a 1 million square foot building. There's 700 staff. There's 75 managers. So there's a ton of opportunity to interact with people that are very good at what they do, absorb their knowledge, understand kind of how they approach things. And so I think that initially was what I really looked to do, is just like, hey, who do I see around me that's doing things in a way that I respect and that I admire? And how do I really embrace that? And they have a ton of training programs and a ton of leadership programs. And so I signed up for everything I could to just kind of go, okay, cool. I want to lean into this, understand how to become a better leader, a better mentor, a better kind of person especially as it relates to work. And so was in restaurants and then food and beverage as an overall division for about 3.5 years. And loved it, loved every moment of it. Again, kind of back to the hotel world where it's long hours, it's holidays, it's weekends, it's, 24/7, 365. And eventually got to the point where I think it's true in every industry, but I think in hospitality, it's especially true of like people come from, you name it, for a background, and it's a war of attrition where it's like, if you can handle it, if you can work as many hours as are going to be necessary, you are absolutely going to grow like 100%. And especially if you're in a big market where like you can ping pong between some properties and kind of like, cool, I'm going to be a general manager and then I'm going to move to, assistant director, and then I'm going to jump to director. I may do that once or twice. Now I can be a division head, and kind of, you can really like climb that ladder relatively quickly. It doesn't necessarily mean you're amazing at like having that breadth and depth of knowledge. It means that you withstood the conditions around you and kind of were able to persevere, which is admirable and not to be diminished. But I think there was a point I hit where I was helping run the entire division and kind of going, okay, what can we do better? We have these problems that we've identified, but like, how do we fix them? And especially I think as it related to finance, which again, I'd gotten a degree in, but hadn't really actively used, and specifically kind of accounting side. And so I finally kind of got to the point where I think I could admit to myself, I'm still faking this. Like I sit in a room and like review a P&L and I can read one for sure, but like, how do I take action on these things? Where do the numbers come from? Why are they on the page? What's contributing to them? What can we control? What can't we? And found myself kind of going, holy shit, I don't know. And really choosing to say, okay, I want to take a step back to know what this is. And we had an assistant director of finance job open at the time. And so I took a pretty big pay cut to go, hey, I think this would help me round out kind of my skill set where I've operated for a long time. I've been involved in startups. I've been involved in kind of a lot of different areas, but I didn't really have that, like, I didn't have anything kind of putting it all together. And like it's like having all the pieces of the puzzle, but you don't have the box to look at to go, oh, this is where they all go.
Yeah.
And so I think in retrospect, that was one of the best decisions I've ever made, where I was able to work with an amazing mentor in my boss, Will, who I still can't believe took the chance on me of like, hey, I went to school for this 15 years ago or 10 years ago, but I haven't really used it at all. And to say it's on a shelf dusty is a hell of an understatement. And so I kind of went, hey, I'd love to do this, but I'm going to be the first to say, do I remember the idiosyncrasies of like depreciation scheduling? No. Do I, I didn't really have that depth of knowledge off the bat. And so he took a chance on me and I said, hey, I'm not going to be the smartest guy in the room, but I'll outwork anyone around me and I'll prove that to you. And so my first 6 months to a year in that role was true. Like I was there at midnight, I was there at 5 a.m., like whatever I needed to do to understand, like to go, okay, I want to know where this comes from or where this goes. And just seeing this back end of, again, this like 55 department building that had marketing, it had engineering, it had, sales, it had rooms, it had spa, it had restaurants, it had catering, it had all these different areas.
Yeah.
Where it's like, again, it's like on, it's a business on crack where it's like, right, okay, you're going to do $75 million this year, spread over all these areas with all these support areas, with all this administration, with all this operations, everything. Yep. And I literally, I think I walked into Will's office at one point and I was like, I want to own all of it. Like I want everything to go through me. I want to be able to, I want my hands in everything, not because I wanted to control it, but because I was like, I want to know how all of it works. I want to know how to calculate cost of goods sold based on this inventory in the spa. I want to know how that differs from restaurants. I want to know how that, how that then impacts revenue on room side and how do those relate and what's our forecast pace and like just every aspect. And so I spent I think 3.5, 4 years in finance, and truly like I felt like it was the first time I was like, okay, I think I actually know what I'm talking about, instead of just acting like I know what I'm talking about, you know? So I think that to me was kind of the cumulative effect of the prior 15 years of work, kind of finally being able to kind of put it all together and go, okay, I finally appreciate what I still don't know, because I thought I had all the answers before. And now I'm like, holy shit, as I peel the layers back, I know less and less about this stuff. But I think it helped me appreciate kind of the context of decision-making, the perspective that a dozen different executives and 700 different people in a building can impact, and how to run labor for an engineering department versus a marketing department versus a restaurant, you know, and kind of how to bring it all together ideally. And hopefully mentor some people and help others and help share that knowledge that I'm kind of accumulating right then. And so I'm a huge nerd in a lot of ways. And so I think I was probably like more enthusiastic than people were used to in finance. But I think it made me a more dangerous person, in the sense that, like, I think usually ops and finance aren't tied to each other at all. Like, they're competing with each other traditionally in most businesses, where the finance person's going to come in and say, you need to cut here. The ops person's like, they don't know what the hell they're talking about. Mm-hmm. Like, if I cut there, you know, and same thing the other way, where it's like, hey, we need more. And the finance person's like, we're already on thin ice. Like, we can't do X, Y, or Z. And so I think seeing both of those made it really a really kind of compelling time where I could start helping share that with others as well. So I ended up helping open some properties for Montage, traveling around the country and realigning some like different priorities for them, and like just helping with like financial training and payroll training and ops training and kind of all sorts of stuff. So it was, I really enjoyed it as far as the knowledge I got, even if I maybe lost a few years off my life with the amount I worked. But
yeah,
it was
good for you for being willing to take the pay cut for the sake of learning. And I mean, just hearing your background, I appreciate you sharing the detail. It sounds like you had truly built a foundation of all things, you know, hospitality, restaurants, finance, just like you said, the full spectrum to be able to go out and execute. And so I mean, jumping into Vessel, so 2016, that's when you guys found it. So I'd love to hear about transition out of Montage to Vessel. What, like, you know, why this concept? I mean, just kind of the whole founding of it would be very interesting.
Yeah. So it's interesting. I think most of the major moments in my life have not been my active decision. It's been that I was in the right place at the right time and said yes to whatever. Moving to Thailand in college, my best friend Tyler literally dragged me over there, essentially not kicking and screaming, but like, I wasn't booking a plane ticket and he was like, we're sitting down and booking, like, where I didn't have a choice in the matter. And so I think this was also one of those things where a mutual friend, Jeff, introduced myself with Nick, the other co-founder. And we sat down and he had a deck that he'd written for, you know, from 5 years ago or whatever it was, and just kind of put on a shelf and let sit there. And so we ended up sitting down and just talking about, like, you know, he initially was like, hey, I just need someone to help with kind of the ops side, the administrative side. I feel good about the concept and I just need help kind of putting it together. We ended up going through everything he'd made and I think we're revising a lot, refining a lot. But as much as that, just talking about like food and what we want from it, and also like what the market has and what it doesn't have. He was working in Kimball Junction, had Whole Foods. And at the time that was it. Like, not a slight to Maxwell's or any of the other concepts, but like, if you're working there and you're getting lunch, you're limited to 3 or 4. At the time it was Cafe Zupas and maybe Five Guys. I don't even think they were there yet, but there really wasn't a ton yet. And so he saw the opportunity and was like, hey, I want to give this a shot before I'm, 40, 45 with a couple of kids, where I, have too many obligations to kind of take the risk and do something that may not be successful.
Right.
And so we initially sat down, worked through a lot of his, business plan, completely gutted and rebuilt pro formas and budgets and kind of everything associated. Menu, same story. Went to California to, go to Tender Greens, go to Lemonade, go to Sweet Greens, go to, those handful of concepts that we were in the same kind of world with. And then come back and he had a great group of people that he knew through lacrosse. He was a lacrosse coach up in Park City. So high school lacrosse, in Park City especially is a group of people that are affluent, that, have either still working or retired pretty young, and have kids that they're raising in the community for sure. And so on the funding side, we were very, very fortunate that he had a group of people he knew, specifically one person, Kathy, that could really go to her groups of friends and say, hey, I'm taking a flyer on this. Let's see what happens. We're raising this much money, and, we'll see where it goes from here. And we don't know, we don't know if it's going to be amazing or if it's going to flop or kind of where we're going to land. And so this is early 2016. I was still at Vessel for another almost 2 years. So I left Vessel. I left Montage near the end of 2017. Okay. So I kind of did double duty for quite a while. But so Nick and I meet, we sit down, realize that we're compatible kind of as, we, I think, had good complementing skill sets. We appreciated where the other's perspective was. And I think realized, okay, we can do something together and we'll see where it goes. It was pretty immediate that we also caught wind of a site that would be in Kimball Junction that wasn't yet on the market as available. And it was currently a different business operating that had always struggled, and went, hey, this is the perfect site for what we're trying to do. It's the perfect location. Park City is kind of more tourist, like Old Town Park City is more tourist focused. Kimball Junction is kind of where the locals go. And so we kind of went, okay, this, it's right next to Smith's. It's kind of in, great kind of activation center, like everything kind of worked out. The biggest fear was that the current concept was doing like very, very little money a day. And so we're like, okay, is this, for whatever reason, if it's traffic or if it's just location in general, if it's signage, whatever those factors are, is this kind of just a doomed space that's going to continue to flip places, one after the next? Because we've all seen those spots where it's like, what is it this month? Or, this 6 months or whatever it is. And so we I would say we probably had a month to 2 months of like really going through and refining a lot of the menu, a lot of the business plan, a lot of the budget, before the site came up, and we went, holy shit, like, okay, we got to go. And so I happened to be actually in South Carolina in Palmetto Bluff at the time, because Montage had just taken over the property. And so I was out there kind of helping them for a couple of months. And so Nick basically calls me, he's like, hey, this came up. We have to jump on it. So, with the faith and the trust from these investors that are still all investors in the business, we were able to put funds together very quickly to be able to at least kind of get our pre-opening budget kind of established and go, okay, this is what we can afford to do and this is what we can't. So that was in, I want to say like March through May of 2016. And then started looking around for a chef, because we knew neither of us are going to be the culinary talent that kind of gives this the true identity that we're looking for. And through some local connections, found a chef that was currently at Promontory as the executive chef there. Roe Levy, that's our third co-founder. He is Israeli, grew up, and went to culinary school, and kind of was a ski bum. So he moved to Park City, and him and his wife moved out here, a number of years before I did. But had that culinary backbone, had Mediterranean kind of as his flavor profile that he was nailed, and for obvious reasons. And so we brought him on in June, and then started construction, I think also in June, and ended up opening in August, where, it was a hell of a 6 months, where it was kind of like, okay, you talk about priority management and kind of like, okay, we need to be writing a menu, finalizing a menu, getting insurance squared away, getting, payroll, and like all those kind of all the back end stuff. Yeah. That's far less fun and kind of less sexy, but that I think between Nick and I, he started with a bunch of that stuff and then went, I'm too busy trying to get everything else going and manage construction and timelines, and Roe's experimenting with menus, and kind of all this is happening simultaneously. So I ended up kind of slipping into more of like administration that I could do from afar a little bit more, deal with payroll, deal with insurance, deal with kind of all the back end stuff, run the financials, and make sure that we were landing in a good spot. And so we opened in August of 2016. So we just had our 7-year anniversary a couple of weeks ago. And I think I had written a pro forma that I'm notoriously conservative on, where it was like year 4, we'd break even. And like we'd start at $1,000 a day. And then by year 2, we're doing $2,000 a day. And then by year 3, we're, kind of pacing up towards, and we knew how much cash we need in the bank, and it could establish all that. And I think day 1, so then ironically, I want to say it was our first weekend. Yeah, it was our first weekend. I had to go to my godson's baptism in Oregon. And so I wasn't there. So we'd open on Wednesday or Thursday, have a barn burner of a couple of days. We have to close for a day to like make more food because we're doing 5,000-6,000 a day just out of the gate. And we have like 7 people that we've hired because we're like, we're going to be slow. It's going to be fine.
Right.
And so I'm calling everyone I know at Montage, like managers, where I'm like, could you please cashier for like 4 hours? I'll do it. And, we're all calling in favors with everyone we know until we can kind of catch up and like hire more people and settle into a rhythm. And so that first couple of months was, I would say, rocky, but in the best way possible, where we were kind of caught flat footed going, oh, we aren't going to be busy. And then going, holy shit, like best problem to have. Now, how do we make sure that we're not falling short of anyone walking in the door? So it was quite the opening. And so at that point, I'm still at Montage for the next year. And I think in that time, we settled into quite the rhythm of just like who does what. And, I was largely administration. Nick was dealing with more operations, Rowie with culinary. And so we all kind of had our role, but we all kind of slipped in and out of the other person's as well, of like, we all loved having menu input because it's the fun stuff. It's like, hey, I love these things together, these flavors together, these vegetable, whatever those things are. And Nick and Rowie were on the ground, and I will forever be grateful of that because I was still at Montage and kind of trying to do both. And then just kind of hit the point where I was like, I can't possibly, we can't. And especially because with Vessel, I think one of our goals, and one of my goals specifically, always having worked in restaurants, you work with every system you can imagine, at hotels even more so, where it's like, you have, I think Montage at one point we had 43 different literal like IT systems. And I think 4 of them talk to each other, where it was just like a disaster all the time. Not disaster, but like you have to go pull this report that you have to manually add to this, and like nothing talk to each other, nothing connected. And so that was always, I think, a thoughtful goal of ours with Vessel was how do we build this to scale from foundation? Like, I don't want to have to come back in a year and go, holy shit, we're too busy, we need to hire this or do that, whatever it was. And a lot of that, I think, was, for me at least, was very much like, we can automate so much of the administration. We shouldn't really need to hire like a AP clerk, where someone that's just going in and dealing with invoices and coding things and managing purchase orders and like all the, again, not very fun stuff that needs to be done. And so our goal from day one was, let's find systems that are kind of forward thinking, that we can build a tech stack and a digital ecosystem that allows us to continue growth, where we're just adding a location. And it's as simple as replicate it, flip the switch, add it to kind of the scale, and go from there. And so I think that we got right from day one, and the things we got wrong from day one could fill a couple of books. But I think initially that startup phase, it's such, for me at least, it's such like there's no playbook, right? Like, there isn't anyone that's like, here, take my hand, I'm going to show you even the things you need, of like, hey, you need to have workers' comp insurance, you need to have general liability, like there's no like nothing out there where you're like, how to start a business. And, Utah actually does a great job with like their one-stop business registration, and like, you can kind of see it all in one spot, and they help you with all your, like, it's actually amazing compared to a lot of other states. But it's still super intimidating, and it's a lot of work to go, okay, did someone remember to, I mean, even our most recent location, Nick and I looked at each other and I went, who's getting the business license?
Yeah.
It was like, yeah. And like, and Farmington City is wonderful. And so they helped us get one in the time we needed. But like, there are those heart stopping moments of like, did we think of everything or did we not? Yeah. So it's a lot, especially Project One. It was constant, like truly constant. Yeah.
That's amazing. Well, I'm curious, Brian, on this, the initial raise that you guys had to do. I like to go into some of the weeds here for people raising money for this type of stuff. How much did you guys have to raise? And then how did you structure that with those investors? And I would love to hear.
Yeah. So initial raise was $500,000 to start the first vessel. It was as shoestring as they come. And it was also kind of a terrifying thing because that included any cash we'd need in reserve, which to me is, I think, the reason the stat seems to vary depending on who you talk to, but a lot of restaurants fail pretty quickly. And it's usually because they spend their last dollar getting the doors open and then go, now we need to make money, and not accounting for that kind of long tail of like inevitable kind of buildup of revenue to offset fixed costs and to kind of overcome variable cost structure. And so initially we put together $500,000 in investor funding. That was for permanent equity that they own in perpetuity, with the responsibility of funding additional sites. So as we continue to grow, their percentage wouldn't change, but they would have to fund those additional sites as we continue to grow. And so for us, it was a way to partner as opposed to kind of have an investor. And in retrospect, I don't know that I do anything terribly differently. Of course, like, the percentage you're giving away always feels like a lot, regardless of what that number is. And giving away is not the right term at all, because they're taking a huge risk on a startup, especially. And so I've always, I think with the additional sites that we eventually opened, the number went up quite a bit, and they really never balked. Like there was never that, like, are you guys sure? Is this, are we sure about of course there were good questions asked that we could defend decisions on, but we also, as we grew, we opened in Midvale, which opened far softer than Park City. And we didn't know the market yet of like, school gets out, and in Park City, everyone flocks to town because it's a destination. In Midvale, everyone's getting the hell out. And so all of a sudden school gets out and revenue dips, and we've been open 3 months and we're going, okay, are we going to be okay? And we're out, calling local businesses and just going, hey, I want to bring lunch by. Can I bring you guys lunch, or whatever that is? And so that with that funding side, they continued to just fund every additional store. And we're doing tenant improvement where we have leases on all our sites. We're finally at the point where we're hoping to, start investing in real estate side and kind of having ownership over the site, as well as kind of our own lease with it. But with that said, at the time it was just tenant improvement and, kind of opening capital and all of that. And I'll be the first to say, we went from true shoestring, and then our next two projects, we kind of swung the pendulum to the other side, where we're like, let's blow the doors off, and then learn from that, and went, holy shit, we spent way too much money on this, and got some good value out of it, but other stuff I think we've all kind of done that postmortem to go, this didn't work, this did work. So really, by the time we hit 9th and 9th as our fourth location that we opened right in the middle of the pandemic in May of 2020, that was kind of when I feel like we really started hitting our stride with like site development and with like build out, and just having a better understanding of how to open with marketing, how to kind of put all that together in a package that made sense for us. And at that point, we'd also diminished the ask quite a bit, which every investor is always going to be happy about, where it's like, hey, we think we can do this with less and less, as opposed to more and more. And so I think that structure has worked really well for us. We actually have updated that a little bit to where now we're kind of sharing in that, where we're helping with the funding side and have some benefit as a result. And so I think we've finally landed on kind of the right structure for what we're doing right now. And eventually, if that led to a sale, to an acquisition, to any sort of, M&A side activity, I think we have a really good setup to be able to facilitate that and create the right environment for someone in either private equity or, whatever industry to come in and go, oh, okay, cool. Like, they're building their team. They understand kind of what is required from this. And that's if we ever go down that road.
Yeah, I love it. Yeah, I had Andrew Smith with Savory on the podcast, and yeah, that's a huge thing for them in terms of acquisitions, like systems and scalability and, all of that. So I think you guys...
I know Andrew very well. I actually talked to them for quite a while.
Cool. Yeah. Sure. So that's great. And thank you for sharing the structure. I find it very interesting to know that. And I've been to the Sandy location multiple times. Speaking of build out, I mean, I don't know if that was one of the more done up ones, but it's a beautiful restaurant just in terms of the finishes and quality and all of that. So, speaking of growth, so how did you know when it was right to open up 2, 3, 4, 5? And it sounds like you've been doing about one a year. Have you been able to, it sounds like you're raising money for each of the stores, but are they profitable? How long do you wait to see? Is this going to work to open the next one? How have you thought about that?
So I would say development has been more site selection than it has of course we factor in the financial side, but it's not a concern of will it be profitable or when will it be profitable? We've been very fortunate that to very different levels, like Midvale, Sandy are kind of in one category for us. Park City, Ninth are in another, where a Park City, Ninth is doing a lot more revenue. We almost run two different business models. But both are profitable, and we're very fortunate for that. And I think we've also made some good decisions along the way for that. One of which was building a commissary kitchen in Cottonwood Heights about 18 months ago. And so that really helped us automate a lot of things where up to that point, labor is, of course, for everyone, a biggest expense. And as we're kind of looking at the efficiency and the automation that we had in place to a very limited extent at the stores, and also the consistency, we went, okay, well, if this cook chooses to make this product this way at this store and it's a very different way at the next store, we're struggling with kind of brand consistency and just like I think everyone in that space of with that growth. And so our solution for that was, okay, let's build out a commissary kitchen that we can ship from all 7 days a week if we need to, get a truck, kind of, have a reefer truck on site, and see how much of this we can logically do and thoughtfully do at Central Kitchen to offset and still actually create better quality of product and more consistency, and also automate where we can, where we're investing in industrial food dicers that can help with kind of some of that heavy lifting of so for context, if you go to a major supplier and you're like, hey, I want pre-cut sweet potatoes, you're paying usually about 5x over what a box of sweet potatoes would be, which makes it very prohibitive to buy anything in that realm ever. And so we went, okay, well, can we do it ourselves? And so that's where we kind of went, okay, we spent 150 to 200 hours a week in culinary labor just cutting sweet potatoes, period. Wow. So 5 full-time people dedicated to sweet potatoes a week, which is kind of a wild thought. This machine can do that same amount in 2 hours. And so it's basically a wood chipper for vegetables. And so the goal was that replicated across kind of brand and continuing to, as we can afford to, and as we see that opportunity to kind of take advantage of it, which then gets back to development, where as we continue to grow, our economic model changed quite a bit when that happened, because we spiked fixed cost, lowered variable cost. And so now as we open new stores, our fixed cost model doesn't really change, and the variable cost is getting lower and lower as we gain purchasing power and all this stuff. So we're fortunate in that regard, where for every one of our stores, we're profitable. We're not, going to varying levels, absolutely, but all the stores can stand alone kind of on their own and turn a profit. And so with that, it does change the economic model of stores going forward. And it puts us into an interesting kind of split in the road that we're dealing with now of, okay, do we want the stars that are a ninth and ninth or whatever that location is that are going to generate more revenue? And do we be incredibly selective in trying to just invest in finding those sites? And are there any more in Utah? Versus, are we okay with a little bit lower tier revenue, but we know there's still a substantial amount of margin there because we've already overcome a lot of that fixed cost basis. And so I think that's where we're kind of at a crossroads right now, working with some wonderful people that have done a lot of work in the commercial real estate space, that have great resource, that have helped scale other brands that are like, hey, this person did this, I would be looking at these markets, or here's a great tool that you can use to kind of replicate market conditions for this location and tell you on the Western Seaboard, these are the 12 spots or, 50 spots or whatever it is that you can do that. And so I'd look at, I think our goal is we finish out this market, and I would estimate 2 to 3 more sites. We have a handful of LOIs out right now. It's just an issue of kind of what comes through, as well as what makes sense for us and what kind of, makes sense for the price point and for locations. And we have a few markets in mind, kind of Daybreak, Riverton, that area.
Yep.
Down south, Lehigh, American Fork, which we almost had a site in American Fork that fell through. And then I would say potentially one on the east side of Park City, where if it's Heber, if it's somewhere, in that range, we'll see what that looks like. And we're still in that process of kind of vetting that. I think the goal after that is then, okay, how do we go to other markets and do so thoughtfully and scale thoughtfully, but ideally not also have to kind of go in hot and be like, we're opening a commissary with 7 locations or anything where it's like, now we're raising $10 million or something like that. And so our goal is to find that balance that makes sense for us. Franchising has come up often, but with 100+ recipes that are made from scratch, because we don't buy anything, it's an intimidating thing to try and think of on our side, much less for a franchisee that would be like, I have to make how many? We're like,
right.
13 sauces and dressings and, like all these products and
no McDonald's,
exactly.
Print and paste kind of thing.
And so we're trying to find that blend that makes sense for us, of like managing commissary and like maybe us owning that side and building a franchise model that's hub and spoke with different markets or something like that. But
that's great.
See what happens.
Yeah. Sounds like you guys are thinking, very thoughtfully about the structure and growth and I love it. And if you guys can find a spot down in Lehigh, I'd love that, because that's where I'm at.
We're trying for sure.
Well, cool, man. Well, last couple questions we'll wrap up here, Brian. Just in terms of advice. So we've talked a lot about your background and knowledge, but for someone who wanted to start a restaurant or business, I mean, is there any just, general advice you'd be like, hey, this is one thing you should think about, or this is another thing you should think? I would love to hear that.
I don't think it's about like knowing the right way. I think it's about adapting and evolving, and like there's so many different things that you have to focus on simultaneously. I think finding your priorities and finding your North Star that's going to keep you kind of, that you're making decisions against, where it's like, this is what we do and who we are. And so everything is measured against that. And it's something that we've struggled with as Vessel. Like I don't think we have a perfect knowledge of that today, and it's evolved over the years. And I think that's fine. I don't think that's a problem, but I think establishing what are you trying to accomplish, and what's the edge you have on everyone else, or what's the approach you take. And I think being resilient to the inevitable number of roadblocks that are going to pop up. And I think, to your point, I think a lot of people now more than ever that think that they can come out of high school or college or whatever phase of life they're in and just kind of snap their fingers and it's going to happen for them. And starting a small business is about, it's a war of attrition, and it's how do you make sure that you're able to kind of weather that storm of like, something's going to break tomorrow. Something's going to not go the way you need it to. Some permit isn't going to like, and you can't just sit back and wait for it to happen or complain about it happening. Like go out, like attack it, for lack of a better term. Like go out and get creative with solutions and find creative ways to solve the problems that you will face, and expect it to be hard. Like if you go into it thinking you're going to just snap your fingers and it's going to happen for you. And I think we've all now had that echoed around us by whatever kind of social media we follow and whomever we're around. That's what we see inevitably, is like you're seeing the 1% above the surface, not the 99% of the iceberg that's kind of below it. Mm-hmm. And you're not seeing the work behind it. And so I think preparing yourself for like, expect it to be hard. And if it's not, then you can be pleasantly surprised instead of being shocked that, wait, this isn't going the way I want it to. It's like, yeah, no shit. Like it's never going to. So business to me is more about like, how do you protect the things that are important as you're creatively solving for everything else that comes up?
Yep.
And finding ways to do that and finding people that are better than you at the areas that they own. And that to me is, we're now building a team and building an executive committee and kind of creating, you know, an environment that allows for that, where it's not, you know, we hit a point where as the three founders rather, we cap out. And so then it's about like taking that step back proverbially and going, okay, now we need to have people that own every area. And so I think it's surrounding yourself with people that you trust and that are going to make good decisions in your absence as well as with you there, and that you can pass stuff off to and go, I think they'll get, you know, I think they're going to be good at this. And I think the team will tell you I have very high expectations for myself and for everyone else. I think that at times is very good for the brand and at times isn't as good for the brand. So I having business partners that can help balance you out, I think is also or people around you that can help balance you out and go, hey, let's grab some perspective on this, and not like it's this big, it's not this big. And how do we make it the small thing it is and give it that level of kind of credence instead of blowing it out of proportion. Cause I think that's really easy to do if it's yours and it's your baby and it's your, you know, your livelihood for sure.
Such good advice, Brian. Yeah. And so much we could unpack there, but I love the concepts, keeping your team or getting a team to surround you. We've thought a lot about that too, as our business is thinking about a board of advisors or committees, people who can fill the gaps where we lack and being able to position ourselves for growth. So great advice. And thank you for sharing that. Last question, and something I ask all my guests: when you think about life holistically and kind of, you know, what we're here for and thinking about what success means to you, how do you define that as Brian Reeder? How do you think about success in life?
It's a great question. And it's one for me that I think I'm notoriously poor at answering. I think success to me, I would say, and it's because like there's a million measures, and especially I think in finance and the world, that world, which finance to me is the language of business. And so there's always going to be that ability to measure yourself against others, measure yourself against your former self. And I think there's always going to be those things. And inherently as humans, I think we automatically kind of find the things that aren't going well and tend to focus on them instead of celebrating the things that are going well. I would say my picture of success generally is the day that I automatically look at the things to celebrate as well as the things to improve. And people talk a lot about work-life balance. They talk a lot about kind of, you know, what is, I think that varies per person. And I think there's a huge focus on mental health in our current day and age. And I think that's wonderful. But as business owners, I think balance is something that we have to come last with in a lot of ways. And so I think my picture of success isn't around getting Vessel to a size. It's not around a profit margin. It's not around a revenue level. It's not around anything in that world. On the Vessel side, my picture of success, I would really define as like, do we have a team that's largely happy with working at Vessel, are paid well, and are taken care of as best we can? I would say more holistically in my life, it's more about like finding a healthy balance internally where it's not me pushing for better and more and holding myself to a higher and higher standard, because at least for me, as soon as I achieve something, it's, and I think that's a tendency a lot of people have, is like, cool, that was great. Now what's next? Now, and we move the goalposts every time. And so I don't think it's about not moving the goalposts, because I think that to me implies like I want to do more and I have more that I can do, and I want to learn more about how to grow a business, scale a business, and find those methods. I think it's more about keeping in balance that perspective of like, yes, I'm moving the goalposts, but I can also be grateful for the success we have. I can celebrate it. We can acknowledge it, and we can keep it. We're not looking at at the next challenge is 80%, we're looking at it as the 50%, and what we currently have and what we currently have to be grateful for is the other 50, if that makes sense.
I love that. Yeah. Being able to view your current achievements and what's next kind of on the same plane, giving yourself grace and gratitude for what you've done, but also striving for improvement.
Yeah.
I love it. Well, no better way to end, Brian. Thank you so much for sharing your story and for being here and taking the time.
Of course. Absolutely.
It was great.
Thanks,
love
man.
It, man. And if anyone listening, go check out Vessel. It seriously, I love the food. It's an incredible concept. They do a great job. So excited to see you guys grow.
Thanks, Chase.
Thanks for listening to the Chase Hudson Show. If you liked what you heard, please leave me a review and subscribe to this podcast. Reviews really help us to find better guests and to improve the overall quality of the show. If you'd like to connect with me directly or want to learn more about investing in real estate, send me a DM on Instagram at @officialchasehudson. Again, we really appreciate you listening, and we'll talk to you on the next episode.